Hi everyone, so here is the last part of the presentation we delivered last week concerning the personality factors. We have already said that motivation plays a very important role in the learning process, and a very important or powerful aspect of motivation is the degree to which individuals are intrinsically or extrinsically motivated. So let's first try to distinguish between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So, extrinsically motivated behaviors are ones for which there is no apparent reward except the activity itself. Intrinsically motivated behaviors are aimed at bringing about certain internally rewarding consequences, namely feelings of competence and self determination. To put it simply, intrinsic motivation occurs when the source of motivation comes from within the individual or activity itself rather than coming from outside from the outside world. Extrinsically motivated behaviors are, on the other hand, are carried out in anticipation of a reward from outside and beyond the self. That is that to say that the extrinsic motivation comes from outside the individual or the task itself in the form in different forms, anticipation of reward, fear of punishment, and so on. For more clarification, let's distinguish between the two in terms of their relation to both integrative and instrumental orientation. So the individual can be intrinsically motivated for integrative purposes. An example, the learner wishes to learn L2 for personal growth and cultural enrichment. On the other hand, the individual can also be extrinsically motivated for integrative purposes. So, someone else, such as parents, teachers, or the society as a whole, sometimes may wish the learner to know L2 for integrative reasons. Then, the individual can also be intrinsically motivated for instrumental purposes. An example, the students may learn L2 so as to get a job or so as to continue his or her studies abroad, for example. Then the students can also be extrinsically motivated for instrumental purposes. As I already mentioned, an external power may want or wish the learner to learn L2 for a practical purpose. An example, a corporation asks its staff to get language training. Then the question is, which form of motivation is more powerful than the other? So Brown and Maslow claimed that intrinsic motivation is superior to extrinsic motivation. According to Maslow, motivation is dependent on the satisfaction of basic needs before self actualization can take place. That is becoming the person we have the potential to be. Then Jean Piaget and others pointed out that human beings universally view incongruity, uncertainty, and disequilibrium as motivating. Incongruity is not itself motivating, but optimal incongruity, or what Krasner refers to as I plus 1, may push the learner to seek the solution for certain problems, which means that this kind of congruity is a kind of challenge, is a kind of motivation which pushes the individual to work as best as he or she can so as to achieve congruity between the ideal self and the perceived self. Then Brunner claimed that one of the most effective ways to help both children and adults think and learn is to free them from the control of rewards and punishments and praising the autonomy of self-rewards. As you know, that's one of the weaknesses of the extrinsic motivation and the behaviorist theory in which it is based in general is what would happen if the students are to do something for which there is no reinforcement, and taking into account that even natural behaviors tend to be extinguished once the reinforcement is withdrawn. Then the next question is, what does this have to do with the classroom? So the research shows that successful classrooms usually incorporate both, that is to say, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, though research strongly favors intrinsic motivation, especially for long-term retention. So how can we promote learners' motivation? So generally it is suggested that teachers should motivate their learners through developing the relationship with learners. Then the teachers have to build learners' self-confidence and autonomy. They also have to personalize the learning process, and they should also increase learners' goals orientation. However, it will be very useless to discuss all the previous aspects without taking into consideration the neurobiological dimension, which is said to have very close relationship with all the previous dimensions. So using techniques such as positron emission tomography and magnetic resonance imaging, so some connections have been made between affectivity and mental and emotional processing in general, as well as second language acquisition in particular, which means that this neurobiological dimension do affect students' learning and second language acquisition. So neurobiology, including neuroanatomy, neurochemistry, and neurophysiology, inform several areas of interest for language acquisition studies. For example, plasticity, affect, memory, and learning. Schumann's work has singled out amygdala, which is a part or one section of the temporal lobes of the human brain, as a major player in the relationship of affect to language learning. So the amygdala is instrumental in our ability to make personal appraisal of a stimulus. In other words, if you see or hear or taste something, the amygdala helps you to decide whether or not your perception is novel, pleasant, relevant, manageable, and compatible with your own social norms and self-concept or not. For example, if the teacher asks you to do something which is challenging, something which is difficult, then your reaction of anxiety and fear means that the amygdala has already sent a message to different parts of the brain, informing them that something complex, something challenging is coming. Here we have Schumann's conclusion. So positive appraisals of the language learning situation enhance language learning, and negative appraisals inhibit second language learning. Schumann also notes down that statements such as I do enjoy learning English, I'm studying English because I would like to achieve certain purposes, help in students in enhancing students' learning and acquisition of second language. In more recent work, Schumann and Wood provide further explanation of the neurobiological basis of motivation as sustained deep learning. So, sustained deep learning is rooted in the biological concept of value, claiming that value is a factor that leads human to make certain choices and preferences. So, here are some examples which are provided in this context. So we have homeostatic value and we have sociostatic value. So all such values are said to affect the students' learning preferences and choices. Then the next point is about personality types and language acquisition. So the most popular measurement of personality characteristics is the Myers-Briggs type indicator, commonly referred to as the Myers-Briggs test. So four two-dimensional categories are mentioned in this regard. First, we have introversion versus extroversion. We have sensing versus intuition, thinking versus feeling, and judging versus perceiving. So here we have some characteristics of each type, and you can go back to you can go back to all those characteristics in your book if you like. So what does this have to do with students or second language learning? So Lawrence stressed the importance of the teacher's understanding of the individual differences of the learners in the classroom, which means that the teacher has to understand each student preferences and styles, so that he can make the right choices in terms of activities and materials implemented in the classroom. Then learners exhibited some differences in strategy use depending on their Myers-Briggs types, which means that those preferences, that students' preferences affects the strategies they implement in the classroom as well. So here we have some major assets or benefits of each type, and we have also some major liabilities or problems associated with each preference, and you can go back to them in your book. Then the next question is, how can we measure affective factors? Generally, some affective factors can be reliably measured by means of individual measures or by informed interviews, but these methods are expensive and require highly trained experts to administer them. Therefore, language teaching profession relied on paper and pencil tests asking for self-rating by the learner. However, highly independence on such types of tests is said to have a set of problems. First, the most important issue in measuring affectivity is the problem of validity. So how can we know that the subject's self-perceptions are accurate? How can we know that those perceptions reflect their characteristics and personal preferences? Then the next main point uh, that that of self-flattery, which means that the test takers will try to discern or show answers that make them look good, or at least those answers which don't damage them. Then the final negative point is that extroversion, tests of extroversion, anxiety, motivation, and other factors can be quite culturally ethnocentric, using concepts and references that are difficult to interpret cross-culturally. I think this is clear. Then what does this have to do with the classroom again? So every classroom context has its share of extrinsic motifs, and extrinsic motifs can never be removed, in fact, from the classroom. Some extrinsic motifs may be very useful, and each program brings a set of external aspects which motivate students in a way or in another. So the teacher has to to think about the interplay in the classroom between intrinsic and extrinsic motives, and try to improve intrinsic motivation through the use of different kinds of strategies. And we have here we have some commandments concerning this. So he has to set good examples, create pleasant atmosphere for students, present the task properly, develop relationship with learners, and so on. So you have all those details in your book. So that's all concerning the last part of the presentation concerning personality factors. Thank you very much.